Hey guys, and welcome to another one of my tutorials. So in this video, I'll be showing you step by step how to create the game Wordle in Unreal. And in case you don't know what Wordle is, I just want to explain the rules real quick. So Wordle is a game that came out about a year ago, and it was pretty popular, and it's still pretty popular. And the goal of the game is to just guess the correct word. So in this case, the correct word is going to be 5 letters long, which is why there's 5 columns. And you're going to have 6 guesses to correctly guess the word, which is why there's 6 rows. So when you start out, you can just guess whichever word you want because you have no information. So I'm just going to say random word apple, type it in, press enter. And when you press enter, you get information about your guess and specifically about the letters. So if the letter stays the same color and gets that sort of dark brownish color, I guess, like the A and the P's, that means that the letter is incorrect and it does not exist anywhere in the word. If it turns yellow like the L, that means the letter is correct, meaning it's in the word, but it's not in the correct location. And if it turns green like the E, that means it's in the correct location, and obviously it's also in the word. So this is telling us that the correct word has an L in it at some location other than the second to last character, and it has an E as the last character, and it doesn't have an A or a P in it. So now I can try a different guess, like slide. And when I do this, now I get even more information. So now it's telling me that I have moved the L to the correct location, and I've correctly guessed the I and the D's location, and the E is of course still was. And now I just need to figure out the first character. So I set this up so I know what the correct answer is, because I didn't want to not know when I was writing this part or recording this part. So the correct answer is glide. So when I press glide, I will get all green characters, and I will get a game over. So that's essentially how the game works. Obviously, in the real game here that we're about to code, it's going to randomly select a word for you. It's not going to be glide every time, just so you know. And then back in the main menu, you can restart the game or quit. And I've also added options here for setting the word length. So for example, you could make it a 7 letter word, and you can also reduce or increase the number of guesses. So you can say I want 7 words or 7 letters in the word, and I want 7 guesses. And you can hit play, and the board will adjust accordingly, and it will choose a 7-letter word now. So let's go ahead and jump into it. All right, so go ahead and open up the Epic Game Launcher like I have here and launch Unreal. I'm going to be launching version 5.0.3. And while this is launching, go ahead and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and liking the video. It really does help a lot, and of course it is free. Once this is open, we're going to select Games, and make sure you have Blueprints selected because we're going to be doing this in Blueprints. And we just want the blank project like you see here, and then give it a name. So I'm just going to call it Wordle tutorial and create the project. All right, so the first thing we want to do is create a game mode, because the game mode is going to be the thing that is kind of controlling the flow of the game. So in the content folder, right click and go to Blueprint classes and create a new game mode base. And we'll just call this the Wordle game mode. And then up in your project settings, edit project settings, we want to change the maps and modes section over here. We want to change the default game mode to our Wordle game mode, and that way it actually gets used. And then we can just close this. So open this up, and the first thing we want to do here is load in our list of words. So in the event graph, we can actually get rid of the tick here because we're not going to need that. And hooking up to begin play, we want to, when the game starts, load our list. Now, in the description of this video, there'll be 2 text files, which will look like this. So there'll be a words 1 and a words 2. Now, the reason I'm giving you 2 is because words 1 is simply a lot shorter of a list. So when you're trying to get this working, if you want to use a shorter list so it's a little bit quicker, feel free. And then words 2 is the full list in the English language. I mean, probably it's missing some, but it's a ton. You can see it's 530 kilobytes as opposed to only 75 kilobytes. So in the description, go ahead right now and download both of these text files, and you want to add them to the content folder. So you can see, I'll do that right now as well. So I'm going to copy them from my other project. So words 1 and words 2, copy, and then go back to the Wordle tutorial project that you just made. And then make sure you go inside of the content folder. They have to be inside of the content folder, otherwise it won't work. And paste them here. And then what we need to do now is read these text files. And unfortunately in Blueprints, there's no easy way to do this, at least not that I know of, to like read and parse a text file. So this part we're going to have to do in C++, which you might be excited about, or you might just close the tutorial at this point. But I promise it's going to be very simple, and I'm going to walk you through it step by step, line by line. So if you've never used C++ before, it's not a big deal. Just follow along, and you guys can hopefully learn a little bit about C++ too if you're unfamiliar with it. So, and it's just going to be this part, the loading of the file, that's going to be in C++. The rest is going to be in Blueprints. So first thing I want to do is right click, or I don't know where this is anymore because they change it every update. Tools maybe? Yeah, tools, new C++ class. If you're on an older version of Unreal, sometimes it's under file, sometimes it's in the right click menu here. You just have to find it. The devs just changed it. I don't know why, I guess to mess with us. So we're gonna hit new C++ class. And the type that we want to create is a blueprint function library. If you don't know what a blueprint function library is, basically it's just a collection of functions that can be called from anywhere that usually do pretty generic stuff, like for example, loading words from a text file. So we're gonna hit next, and then you can call this whatever you want. I'm just gonna call it Wordle library. And then all this stuff should be good by default, and just hit create class. Now when you do this, it's going to convert your project into a C++ project. So that means it's going to give you over here, it's going to give you a source folder, which we already have. It's going to give you a .vs folder. It's going to give you an SLN. It's going to give you a bunch of stuff that Visual Studio needs in order to have it being a C++ project. So now it's asking us the project now includes source. Please close the editor. Okay, so this is fine. Make sure you have everything saved and close, and just hit yes to all these things. And it's going to open up Visual Studio. Now, one thing that's important at this point, we want to go ahead and close, if it didn't already, close Unreal, because we're going to be relaunching it. So hit File, Save All, make sure you save everything, even though we didn't do anything yet, and close the project. And now you should see something that looks like this, which is Visual Studios. And we want to change the top left up here to be Debug Game Editor. That way we can input breakpoints and debug while we're coding. It'll just be helpful. And then over here on the left, this should be by default, but you want to make sure that the Wordle tutorial, if you right click on it, make sure it's set as startup project, which is why it's bold right here. But if not, just click that. Otherwise it won't launch correctly. And then once you have that set, we can just look at this real quick. So in the source file, this is your files. You can see we have the Wordle library.h, which is up here, and the Wordle library.cpp, which is also up here. So these are the files we just created, which we're going to be adding to. Now at this point, you can actually press this button up here, this little green arrow, to launch Unreal. And when you launch it this way, and I recommend launching it this way if you're ever using a C++ project in Unreal, it will actually launch the editor like normal. Just kidding, I guess it's gonna fail. Let's see why. All right, so I just edited that part out, but basically I just had to close the editor down here. At the bottom I had the editor open, and for some reason it didn't like that, so I just right-clicked and closed, and then I just compiled again, and everything was fine. So once it runs, it will open up Unreal. So I have two open, that's just because this one is the one I'm referencing, so don't worry about that. And now we have it open back where we left off before. So the first thing we want to do here is, can we save this map? So I don't know exactly how this works on Unreal 5, it's kind of weird, but just so we can save this map, just like drag in a cube or something and do File, Save All, and now it's going to prompt you to save this level, and we'll just call it Wordle level, maybe Wordle level, and hit save. Because this world by default is like some temporary level, and it doesn't get saved. So now we have our Wordle level here that we're in, and if you want to, you can go up to the project settings and go back to maps and modes and change your editor startup map to be the Wordle level, and also the game startup map as well. So that way when you open the editor or package the game, this will be the default level. And then we can delete this box if we don't need it anymore. Okay, so like I was saying before, inside of our game mode, we want to do something in the begin play here to actually load the words. And that is what we're going to do inside of this library. So if you haven't used C++ before, I'll try to explain this while also going relatively fast for people that have. So inside the header is where you define the functions, and inside of the CPP file is where you write the functions. So here we want to define the functions. First, we want to say public so that anybody has access to it. And then we're going to say u function, all in capital letters. And we're going to say blueprint callable. And we're going to say comma category equals. And I'm just going to copy and paste the name of the class here. So if this is all foreign to you, basically this is just the way Unreal expects you to define functions that you want to call from blueprints. So it has to have this u function macro. All functions do that want to have any sort of communication with blueprints. They have to have this u function above them. And then we're just specifying that as blueprint callable, which means we can call it from blueprints because, like I said, we're going to be calling it from that game mode. And then this is just the category, which just shows, when you right click and it pops up in the menu. It's not that important. Okay, so now that's our macro. And then next we want to say static bool load words from file. And then for the input parameters, this is going to take in a f string for the file name. It's going to take in an int 32 for the required word length. And it's going to take in a t map of int 32s as the keys. And then we're going to make a struct here in a second, and it's going to be called f string array. And I'll explain this in a minute. Just say f string array. And then we want that by reference. And this is going to be the words that come out of the function. So this is actually sort of the return value. And then make sure you put a semicolon here at the end. Now it's going to give you little red squiggly lines because we need to define this struct. So let's do that real quick. So this struct, to define a struct in Unreal, again, you need to use their macros. So we're going to say use struct. And then inside the parameters here, we're going to say that it is we're going to say it's a blueprint type, which just means that it can be used in blueprints because, like I said, we're going to be doing the majority of this in blueprints. And then we just say struct, we give it a name. So we're going to call it f string array. If you are changing the names, make sure you still keep an f here because that's required by Unreal. And then open close brackets and make sure there's a semicolon at the end. And then we want, well, we can just copy this. We want generated body here, copy, paste that. And then the only thing we want inside of the struct is an array of strings. So we're going to say u property. Again, this is just more macro stuff you have to do. And blueprint read only. So what this does when you put this above a variable is it makes it so the variable can be read only, means you can only get it inside of blueprints, but you can't actually set it. And the variable is going to be, like I said, a t array of f strings. And we're just going to call this strings. All right, so don't worry about these little red squiggly lines. It just always does this in Visual Studios until you compile it usually. But now this part should be looking good. So the idea here, just so you kind of understand, is that this function is going to take in the file name, which is going to be our words1.txt or words2.txt or whichever word file you end up using. It just has to look like this. It just has to be a big list of words in the English language separated per line. And it doesn't matter if they're capitalized or not, by the way. You can see this one's capitalized, the other one isn't. We're going to handle all that good stuff. And the next thing it takes in is the required word length. So this is saying basically ignore any words that are less than this amount of characters. So obviously it wouldn't be fun to play Wordle if it was only one character you were guessing, because there's only like 5 letters or 5 words that have one character or something. So, or less probably. But anyways, this is what this is. So we're probably gonna pass in like 3 or something, but you can make this whatever you want. And then this is the out array of words. This is all of the words, and it's a map because the words are going to be separated into their own containers. So you're going to have one container for all the words that have 3 letters, one container for all the words that have 4 letters, one container for all the words that have 5 letters, and so on. And that's just going to make it easier later to, check if the guess is correct. And obviously it's a big part of the game, so I just have it saving as such. So now what we can do is copy this whole line right here, like so, and inside of the CPP file, we want to paste it. Now, when you're defining a function, you don't need the static keyword, so we're going to get rid of that. And you also don't want to have the semicolon at the end, so we're going to get rid of that. And then you need to scope it in. So if we come back here, we can copy the name of the class, this Wordle library, and put it in front, and then use these little colons to scope it in. And then you want to open and a close bracket, like so. And so now this is the definition of the function. And I'm sure somebody's screaming at me right now that you don't actually need this because it's a static function, and I know that, but I like to do it anyways. just so it's clear that this function is part of this class, even though it's a static function. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so now we can write this function. So the first thing we want to do is we want to load the raw text file. And to do that, we are going to make a f string and call it Parse Text. And then we're going to use the file helper library or class, whatever it is. So we're going to say if f file helper load file to string, and then it's going to want the out result, which is our parsed text, and then it's going to want this is not the one we want. It wants the file name. So the file name is what we passed in. However, we want to append the content directory to it because the file name is just words.txt, but we need to tell it where that text file is. So to do that, we can say f path project content directory. Yeah, project content directory. Now, if you don't see project content directory, that's probably because they changed it. This is another thing that they like to change a lot. But basically, this content directory is just pointing to this content folder here. So you might have to look through the different options, but you just want something that returns this path to the content folder. I think it used to be called game directory, if I remember correctly. But like I said, they changed it. We want to add to that the file name. And then you'll notice this actually takes in a tchar. So we really want to say dereference this because that's how you get the tchar in Unreal. And we find this equals false. So basically we're loading this file and we're checking if it failed to load. And if it failed to load, we just want to return false. So this will fail to load if the file is not in the correct location. So if you forgot to put it into the content directly, it's going to return false right here. Okay, so now that, what is that, a comment here? This is just load the raw text from the file. The next thing we want to do is parse the text so that we have one entry per line. Because right now, this parse text is just going to be the entire file inside of one string. So every single word inside of one string. So we want to break that down into an array. So to do that, we can say tarray of f strings, and we're going to call this parsed words. And we're going to set that equal to so we need access to the Kismet library because that's functions inside here. So we're going to include at the top Kismet / Kismet system, Kismet string library. So this is just a library that has helper functions for strings. And we'll say u Kismet string library parse into array. And it wants the string that we want to parse, which is of course our parsed text. And it wants the delimiter, which is the thing that's between each word. In this case, it's a new line because each word is on a new line. So a new line character is actually \n, if you don't know. So this is going to parse each one of the words from the file into an array. We'll just say parse the text. So we have one entry per word. And now we want to loop over the words and add them to our words array, which is our return value, if they are valid words, right? So we're going to say for f string by reference word in parsed words. First, we want to make sure that it is the required length. So we'll say if, I was supposed to say word, not world, if word dot length is less than our required word length, we just want to go ahead and continue. We're just going to restart the loop. We want to ignore that word essentially. So say make sure the word is the required length. And then next we want to make all the words uppercase. So we're going to say word.toUpper. Make sure you do inline. If you don't do inline, it won't actually change the actual invoking object. It's just going to return a new one. And the reason we're doing this is so that regardless of your text file, whether it's lowercase or uppercase or some sort of combination of both, all the words inside of our system are just going to always be uppercase to keep things simple. So make words uppercase. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that it only contains letters. So just in case your text file has something in it like periods or commas or numbers or some bad characters, we want to make sure that we don't include those. So we're going to make a bool here. Let's say first, make sure only contains, if I can type, contains valid characters. So first we want to say bool contains only valid characters. And we're going to set this to true by default. And then we want to loop over each letter in the words. We're going to say for const. I'm going to use auto here because I don't actually know what this is. I think it's a T char, but const auto by reference letter in word.get char array. And then we want to say if the letter does not equal. So we want to do this first of all. We want to make sure it does not equal the null terminator because all letters or all the words in a null terminator, which is basically saying that that's the end of the word. And we want to ignore this when we're checking because all letters have or all words have this at the end. So we don't want it to like mess up our logic. And then we want to check also if it's a ASCII character or an ASCII letter, meaning based on the ASCII value of it, we want to check if it's an A or if it's A through Z. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, let me just open up a ASCII table so you can see what we're doing. So this is an ASCII table, or the ASCII table. There's only one. I mean, there's obviously different images of it, but you can see it tells you all the different ASCII characters. So like all the keys on your keyboard, essentially, more or less. And they each have a decimal value assigned to them. So you can see here's our capital A. And if you look over here, the decimal value is 65. And if we go all the way down to Z, the decimal value is 90. So essentially behind the scenes, when you type in like a J, for example, it's really being stored as a 74, and the computer just knows that it's a capital J, right? But there's all these other characters that you could type, like the plus sign or numbers that have different values. So we want to check that the value of, or the decimal value of the character is between 65 and 90. So to do that, we're just going to write a simple function up here, and we're going to make it static bool. So we're going to say static bool is ASCII letter, and it's going to take in a character, and we're just going to return if the character is greater than or equal to 65, which is A, and if I can type, and if it is less than or equal to 90, I think we said, which is the Z. Yep, great. Okay, so now we can say and if it is ASCII letter, and we're going to pass in our letter, and we want to say equals false, because really we're saying if it's not a letter, we want to, well, we want to do two things. So we want to set contains only, where's that boolean? Yeah, this one we want to set this to false, and we want to break out of the loop, because if we get here, it means that we found a character in our word that was not a letter, and so there's no point continuing to look over the other letters, because if there's one, that's enough to ruin the word, and we don't want to use it. Okay, and then after that loop, we want to check if our contained only valid characters boolean is true. And if it is, we want to add this word to our words array. So we're going to say words dot find or add. And the first value we want to pass in here is the key. So like I said before, the words are going to be separated into different arrays where each array is stored or can be looked up based on the length of the word. So the key is going to be the length of the word. So we can say word dot length. And then we want to say strings, which is that array. We want to say add, and we want to say word. Now, we'll take a look at all this once we're finished, and you can see how it gets populated. And then hopefully that'll make more sense if you're confused. So we're going to say add the word to our map if it contains only valid letters. And then finally, we want to return true, signifying that we successfully loaded the file. So at this point, I think this is all we need to do. Let me just double check. Yeah, I think this is all we need to do, at least for right now. And so back in Unreal, we can recompile this. So you can either, there's a couple ways to do this. You can either come up here. Why is this not? Oh yeah. You need to come up here and press this restart button, which will totally restart Unreal, and obviously it will reload our code. Or if you're brave, you can press this button down here, which recompiles. If you're on an older version, it used to be up here at the top and it used to say compile, but they moved it down here to the bottom. I'm going to use this. Most of the time this will work, especially if you have a simple project. Sometimes it crashes the editor, so make sure you save everything before you do this, but like I said, it should work for our purposes. It's the live coding basically, which will reload your code while the Unreal editor is still open. So if you get that little success message, that means you are good to go. And so now we can come back here, and inside of our game mode, we can start working on the loading of our file. So we can say load words from file, which is this function we just wrote, right? Load words from file. This guy right here, load words from file. And then if you don't see this popping up, make sure you go back and you watch this first part. If you don't see it popping up, it's either because you didn't compile correctly, or your compile failed, or you don't have this set up correctly, most likely. But you definitely should see this. And then we want to give it a words file. So I'm just going to go with words2.txt, which is the longer one. And then the required word length, I'm going to put 3 here. Basically just, again, it's just saying ignore any words that are less than 3 letters. And then we want to do a branch here. So this returns whether or not it succeeded, which the only way it's going to fail is if it just doesn't find this text file. And so if that succeeds, we want to take this, we want to promote it to a variable. And we can make this private over here since nobody else needs access to it. And we'll just leave it named words. That seems pretty good name. And I'm just going to add some reroute nodes here so it's a little nicer. And then let's test this real quick to make sure everything's working before we continue. So to test this, open up Visual Studios again, and then over here, just add a breakpoint on this return true. To do that, you just left click over here in this gray area, and it'll add a breakpoint. And if you have everything set up correctly and you've been following the tutorial, all you should have to do now is just press play up here, and this breakpoint should get hit. So this breakpoint, if you've ever used a breakpoint before, it's basically just pausing the program once the program gets to this specific line of code. So it's really helpful for debugging because we can essentially pause the execution and look at our different values. So this is after we parsed everything and we're about ready to return from the function. We can actually hover over our words map and look at it. So you can say the number is 20, which means that it found words that had 20 different unique lengths, if that makes sense. So if we open this up here, we can see what it actually did. So inside of here, we have our different entries. You can see up here, they're not in any particular order, however. So you can see the first one is 8. So these are all the words that had 8 letters in them. So if we open this up and we open up our strings, you can see all of these letters, or all these words, they're in alphabetical order. These are all the words that have 8 letters, right? And we can do the same thing. We can look at, you know, all the ones that had 4 letters. See, there's 2,000 of these, right? So it should look something like this, or it should look exactly like this. Obviously, if you have a different text file, it might look a little different, but you should see something that looks like this in your words. If you didn't, something somewhere is wrong, and you just kind of have to go back and rewatch this tutorial and hopefully figure it out. But make sure you get this working before you continue, otherwise, obviously, the rest won't work.